Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 13 of the ATRL Charts podcast. My name is Alexander, and I'm here with my co host, Aaron.
Hi, everybody. It's Aaron and Umich from ATRL, and we have some things to talk about today, albeit a lot, but we're going to keep it short and sweet. So let's go ahead and get this kicked off.
All right, let's get right into it. The first thing that we're going to talk about today is Drake. Now, Scorpion was the first thing that we talked about last week as well, and it's going to be the first thing that we talk about this week. Of course, Drake debuting with 732,000 album equivalent units on the Billboard 200, a record 745.9 million streams, obliterating the previous record of 431 million by Post Malone. He has 7 songs in the Billboard Hot 100 Top 10 this week. That breaks the Beatles' record of 5. That's a new all-time record. Nice for What, returning to number 1. Nonstop at number 2. Potential future number 1, In My Feelings at number 6. And Drake has really seen an incredible level of success here in this first week. There's not much else to say, is there?
No, it's not. And to also mention, he also joins Janet Jackson, Michael Jackson, and Bruce Springsteen with having the most top tens from an album ever. So he has made history with that. And the last album to do that was Janet's Rhythm Nation in 1991. So Drake is among the legends, if you will, in that aspect. And he's broken a host of number of other records as well, which are all over Billboard.com and all over billboards around the nation and on CNN and everything. So congratulations to him, definitely.
Now, one of the criticisms of his first week was that it was lower than that of Views, markedly lower, in fact. Views did over a million first week, over 800,000 in pure sales. Scorpion, obviously, far less than that, and only around 160,000 pure sales. But I think it really is indicative of the fact that we're in the streaming era now. It's much harder to get strong first weeks, and longevity is increasingly important. And a first week is not necessarily indicative of longevity. It's not a great predictor of that. Um, and so, even though yes, Scorpion is having a worse first week than Views, it could well perform better in the end, in the long run.
I agree 100% because he has Nice for What and God's Plan, which are very strong still on the Hot 100. So that's going to go a few weeks, a few more months. And then the incoming number one, In My Feelings, which is expected to jump to number one next week. It's probably going to be another mega hit for him, which is going to keep the streams afloat. Remember last time, Drake had One Dance, which was a huge hit, which kept streams going as well as Controller and Take Care. I got them mixed up. Too Good, which was the Rihanna collaboration. So with Views, he had the hits to sustain the streams and album consumption. And with this as well, it's the same thing. He has 3 huge singles right now, and then potentially a fourth, the Michael Jackson collaboration, if it decides to get promoted, which will carry this album to the end of the year in terms of longevity. And with Drake, longevity has never been a problem.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Originally, they were planning to do a dual release of In My Feelings and Don't Matter to Me, with In My Feelings going to rhythmic and urban radio, and Don't Matter to Me going to pop radio and some of the more adult-focused formats. But because In My Feelings has kind of gone viral with a viral dance meme, they've scrapped Don't Matter to Me, at least for now. They might still release it later, who knows. But In My Feelings is the new single from Drake, the only new single from him. Um, and that brings me to the next thing related to Scorpion that I think is interesting, and another indication of the streaming era that we're in, is the fact that In My Feelings has blown up so much so quickly. Um, we've seen a general trend of songs off of especially rap albums in the streaming era, individual album tracks, blowing up upon the release of the album. 21 Savage's Bank Account, Future's Mask Off, recently Post Malone's Better Now, and now In My Feelings. We see this now in the streaming era, the ability for the public to latch on to a single album track and propel it to stardom.
Yes, and it's synonymous to what we saw in the sales-driven era a few years ago, where an album would be released, and then you'll have a few tracks that will linger around in the top 20, 30, 50 on iTunes, and then months later they become singles because they do so well. So again, it's a very synonymous way of transitioning from that era to the streaming era, and then seeing how many hits can be sustained with that. But sometimes that may work against an artist and against the label because the tracks are so popular when the album comes out and months after the album comes out, but then sometimes months and months after the album, or even like a year after the album comes out, they decide to release the single, and then you get what is called streaming fatigue, whereas everybody that has owned the album or is consuming the album has already played that song to death, and they're not going to stream it as much as they did months ago, but when the album came out. So that's one thing that's going to work against artists and labels going further along, in an era for these artists.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. And streaming fatigue, I love that term, and that's exactly what happened with Kendrick Lamar and his song "Love." "Love" was one of the most popular songs off of his album "Damn." Immediately after the release of the album, it was one of the top streaming songs initially, but his label decided that they would hold off on releasing it until over half a year after the album came out last winter. And Love did fantastic on radio. It peaked really high on both rhythmic and urban radio, and it got some pop airplay. But despite that, it couldn't reach the top 10 of the Hot 100, which would seem like a shoe-in if you saw its initial streaming numbers. It was top 10 on Spotify for weeks on weeks, despite not being a single and not having a music video and not being performed anywhere and not being promoted anywhere. So it's really indicative of the fact that streaming has, in effect, shortened eras and made it much harder to score balanced hits late in an era. You're talking third, fourth, fifth singles. You can look at, like, Delicate right now by Taylor Swift. A number one song on pop radio, to be, the number two song on overall radio, and yet, because it's not top 200 on Spotify and not top 200 on Apple Music, it's really has a very low chance of going top 10.
Yes, and with that, again, with her era, it was very popular in the first few months, and then after Christmas, and when the first few months came around, it was like "Delicate" is the fourth single, and knowing back, offhand, it's like it's not going to be a really big hit unless it gets a huge push from her label, and it doesn't seem like they're putting too much effort in trying to make the streams huge or anything. They're just kind of letting this go and see where it goes. But honestly, a top 20 hit from an album that was mostly driven by like pure sales units. I mean, that's pretty good. I know she can pretty much end the era today, and it would be a massive success, given the tour as well. But going back to the whole streaming fatigue thing, it's a lot of artists are going to see this in the future. Rihanna, whenever she decides to release, she's going to release an album. It's going to happen to her. And then mostly artists who really don't care, if you will, about their errors after the album is released. I mean, Drake had that syndrome a little bit, but it looks like he's putting a little bit more effort into making his errors a little bit more extended than they used to be. So it'll just be worthwhile to see in the future.
And another interesting point that this kind of brings up is that it gives the labels less power to decide which songs are going to become huge. I mean, labels can no longer just dictate to the public which songs are going to be singles and which songs radio is going to pick up. They have to listen to the public. They have to see the public's initial reaction, and then they have to gauge whether that reaction is authentic and whether it's going to last. And if it does, they need to make that song a single as quickly as possible before the streaming fatigue manifests itself. And so, from a label's perspective, you've got to be a lot more in tune with the public than you did before. Because in the sales era, very few people were hearing album tracks right after an album came out. It was only the people that actually bought the album. There was no other way to hear the album tracks. But with streaming, with on-demand streaming, everybody can listen to all of the songs on an album the minute it comes out. They can listen as many times as they want. They can share it around. They can make memes out of it. They can talk about it on social media. And so there's just a much easier burnout for album tracks today. It's much easier to burn them out, and that's the root cause of the streaming fatigue effect that we're talking about.
Exactly. And, just another example, Post Malone's I Fall Apart. Um, it was obviously a popular song and it did really well on the Hot 100. But again, it was released nearly a year after the song had gone viral randomly on Twitter after a performance he did at some concert. Someone posted the video, and then it got shared a lot of times, and then this label decided, oh, let's make it a single since it's becoming slightly popular. And it did okay on Spotify. I mean, for a single for a single from an album that was almost a year old, it did pretty good. Um, but it could have done better had it been released earlier on in the Stony era cycle. But again, his label probably didn't realize how much he would blow up after Congratulations. So they just kind of let it rest, and they were actually going to start the era much earlier than they did the second era, but they let Congratulations and I Fall Apart do its thing, and then they released the album. But going along with that streaming fatigue thing is like, I think that's one thing that labels would need to kind of look at going forward after releasing an album and kind of make a decision as to when to plan singles, videos, and any other forms of promotions that artists may have for the song.
And another aspect of Scorpion's debut that is pertinent to our conversation about how the streaming era is fundamentally changing the music landscape is the fact that all of Scorpion, I mean, technically Scorpion has 7 top 10 hits, but not 7 top 10 hits the way you traditionally think about 7 top 10 hits, like you would with, say, an album like Teenage Dream, where Katy Perry had 5 number 1 hits, but they were many months apart. You only had one song going number 1 at a time. It's not like Scorpion, where you've got 7 songs in the top 10 all at once and all in the first week, and a lot of those songs are going to fall off the top 10 and fall out of the Hot 100 in a few weeks' time. And it calls into question, well, how valuable is a top 10 placement really in this climate? Is it true that a top 10 placement guarantees you a hit? No, I think that's clear. You look at an artist like J. Cole, KOD, Kevin's Heart, and ATM, they all debuted in the top 10, but you wouldn't really call a song like Kevin's Heart a proper hit. It was popular during the album release week, and then after that it fizzled out. And it's not equal to a song that spends 15 weeks, 20 weeks, 25 weeks inside the top 10, garnering massive airplay over a long period of time, garnering consistent sales, consistent streams. So the point is that going top 10 is no longer a sufficient condition for having a hit. Just because you're top 10 doesn't mean you have a hit. On the other hand, you could spend a lot of time outside the top 10, never reach the top 10, and still have a hit.
Exactly, and I agree 100% with all of that. And I'm all a fan for Billboard staying current with the times and realizing that streaming is a measurement of popularity. But there should be some type of distinction with these records, obviously. And I'm not downplaying Drake's success. He earned it fair and square. His album tracks were very popular during the week of the release, and Billboard Hot 100 is a reflection of songs that are popular within the past week. So technically, Drake earned it. But when these records are made and broken by artists of the new, I guess, generation, if you will, I think there just needs to be some distinction as to, this was done in this era, that was done in that era, and so on and so forth. And I think that's what a lot of people and casual fans are kind of, advocating for. They're not necessarily against an artist because of the fact that they're breaking all of these records. It's just that there needs to be some type of distinction, or as ATRL likes to call it, asterisks, for certain types of, records that are broken. But going back to your point, it's like, when Billboard does year-end Hot 100, top 100 singles, they're doing that based on popularity over the whole year and not just for, a particular week or whatever. So that's why Billboard does a good job in collecting those points and making sure that they're accurately measuring the songs that are popular throughout the whole year. So when we see the Hot 100 year-end for 2018, we're not going to see, 20 Drake songs in the top 20 or top 30, because some of those tracks that charted, during album release week were, not consistent hits, and that's going to be reflected at the end of the year. So, for weekly Hot 100 purposes, if a song is popular, if it got streamed 100 million times, sure, it can be represented on the chart, But as we look at it at the end of the year and as time goes on, a lot of people are not going to, remember a certain song that spent 1 or 2 weeks in the top 10 or, 1 or 2 weeks on the chart, if you will, versus a song that spent, 20, 30 weeks on the chart and slowly descended its way down. So, I agree with everything that you said.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to one central point, which is that longevity really matters now. You've got to pay attention to what songs and albums have longevity and which ones don't. Just like how a first week is not, a big first week isn't necessarily indicative of an album that's going to do great in the long run. So goes the first week of a song. That doesn't mean it's going to do great in the long run, especially if you know that it's an album track and it's very likely to plummet in the coming weeks. And you see a similar parallel with certifications. Nowadays, RIAA certifications, gold and platinum certifications, you can earn them over long periods of time, even if your song isn't a hit. Just if your song gets consistently low streams, if you get those consistent low streams for a long time, you're going to eventually get a certification. So it takes a lot more discerning nowadays. You need to have a more skeptical eye when you hear that a song goes 3 times platinum. Well, let's think about how long did it take to go 3 times platinum, right? If you hear a song, say a song goes gold in a month, that's pretty impressive because it only took a month. It clearly shows that there's a lot of momentum with the song. So longevity matters, and that's one of the points that we're trying to hammer home here. Um, the streaming era is a different era for music, and for the casual fan, it's difficult to tell these kinds of things. When you hear a report saying that Drake beat Michael Jackson or whomever he beat with the most songs in the top 10 at once, that sounds amazing. That sounds like he's truly a transcendent artist of our generation. Not saying he's not, but stats can be misleading, and you've got to read into them more. And that brings us to our next topic, which is the song of the summer. What will be the song of the summer? Well, right now, there are a bunch of candidates. In My Feelings, of course, we just talked about, is the coming number one, and it looks pretty likely to stay strong in the future. It had several massive, massive gains on Spotify over the last 2 days. Went from 2.6 million daily plays 2 days ago to 4.14 million daily plays today, pushing near the top 10 days of all time, and certainly a strong song of the summer contender.
Yeah, I think it's kind of clear at this point that it's probably going to be a Drake song, based on how things are going. But there are a few dark horses, if you will. Songs that are creeping up in popularity. There are talks that um, Lucid Dreams, because they kind of came out of nowhere and actually was predicted to hit number one a few weeks back, but I guess there was some streaming discrepancy between Nielsen and Billboard. There were also talks that Girls Like You, Boot Up, I Like It, and those are definitely contenders and songs that will probably stick around for a good part of the summer. But as we know right now, I mean, there's a Drake stronghold on the Hot 100 right now. I mean, he just had 11-week number one God's Plan. He's currently at number one. Nice for What? And then In My Feelings is supposed to jump to number one next week based on predictions. And honestly, I can see that song remaining at number one for the rest of the summer. Um, and it's kind of lucky that Cardi B kind of snuck in and got the number one before all of the Drake storm happened. Um, but I think I have a 80% confident level that In My Feelings will probably be the song of the summer just based on the instant reception to it and the fact that it's gone so viral. And, celebrities are now reacting to the song. Instagram is flooded with these challenge videos. It's all on Facebook. And, I'm pretty sure radio's going to latch into it. Rhythmic and Urban are already on board. It's probably going to be a decent sized pop hit as well. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be In My Feelings.
Yeah, Nice for What would need to hold up amazingly well to keep the title. Nice for What currently holds the number one spot on the songs of the summer chart, but it's likely to be overtaken over the course of the next few months. The chart ends on Labor Day, which is around 2.5 months from now for non-American members that might be listening. It's the first week of September that chart ends. Um, I Like It, Boot Up, Lucid Dreams. They're all big hits in their own right. I Like It especially has done absolutely tremendous at radio, far better than I personally ever anticipated, and has had really strong, consistent streaming numbers for several months now, and that's a really impressive feat that should be noted, especially because Cardi B was pegged by many to be, a fad, a one-hit wonder, or whatever. She's really proving her staying power with this, and Girls Like You as well, which has also had tremendously impressive on-demand streaming for essentially a pop song with a 30-second rap feature. Um, Better Now by Post Malone, I thought might have had a chance if the album had come out 2 months later. But like you said, streaming fatigue is going to set in for the song, and unless it becomes like some transcendental hit at radio, like Blurred Lines' "Happy Size," which it won't be the song of the summer. Um,
Yeah, and then with back to just 1 second, I want to point out the Cardi B thing, and it's very impressive that obviously Rhythmic is going to play the song. It's a very pop R&B crossover or pop hip hop crossover. Pop is going to play it, but I was very surprised that it's doing very well at urban radio because I mean it's 2/3 Spanish, 1/3 English. So I was very surprised to see that it was getting like significant urban airplay. But that's just a testament as to how big Cardi B has become in the last year since she's blown up. So that was one of my picks actually for Song of the Summer until Mr. Drake came along. But that's not to say I like it. It's not going to be a huge summer hit because it already is, and it's very impressive to see to see her get that multi-format airplay.
so to move on, recently the Nielsen released their 2018 mid-year report, containing a lot of different statistics on artists, songs, albums, and the overall state of the industry. The most important number in that report: total consumption was up 18.4%. That's album sales, track equivalent albums, streaming equivalent albums, and video streams, as well as traditional on demand streams like Spotify. Total consumption in the United States was up 18.4%, which is great news for the industry. On demand streaming year over year was up 45.4%, video streaming up 34.7%. Song sales, not surprising, down 27.4%. They declined around 25% last year. And vinyl sales continue to surge. They're up 19.2%.
Wow, it's just amazing. Like each year that the sales are going down, and it's really time to grasp the fact that streaming is here. It's not going anywhere for a while into the next technology. Music technology comes out. So the music industry is thriving. A lot of artists have transitioned well from the digital slash sales era to the streaming era, and it's reflected, as you said, in that Nielsen report. So it's not it's not that the music industry is dying. It's just that we're changing. It happened when we transitioned from cassettes to CDs, and then people stopped buying CDs and started downloading MP3s. Well, now it's happening again. People are transitioning from buying music and going something that's cost effective, because why spend $1.29 on a song or $9.99 on an album when I can just pay $9.99 a month and stream unlimitedly and stream unlimited music and whenever I want and whatever I want. So it all boils down to cost. And in this day and age, we are trying to find ways to make things cheaper for us because we don't want to pay money for a song every time we buy something. We see something that's convenient like Spotify, Apple Music, or whatever streaming service that you use, and whatever you're paying a month, which is around $10. And when you boil that down for a consumer, that's very cost effective for them. So, and vinyl sales, as you said, vinyl sales are continuing to surge, and I think that just goes with the fact that a lot of people are starting to realize how great vinyls sound when you have a nice record player, and then some of those things also become collectors items as well. So that's those are a few reasons why I think the sales are rising for vinyl.
Right, it's so interesting to see vinyl sales just continue to surge, even as consumers are looking for cheaper and cheaper ways to consume music. That juxtaposition might seem unnatural at first, but vinyls are clearly geared towards big fans of an artist, people who are devoted fans, people who are already buying tours, buying tickets to tours, buying merchandise, buying collectible albums, things like that. And vinyls are quickly becoming one of the only viable collector's items because of the death of physical albums, the death of CDs. So you've basically got, for diehard fans, you've got vinyls and you've got tour tickets. And of course, we've seen the industry take advantage of the latter with ticket bundles, which we covered last week. So it would be interesting. And we also mentioned how Spotify was at least considering offering a bundle that consisted of a subscription to Spotify, as well as a certain number of vinyls each month. I believe it was 3 vinyls each month for the, and maybe they want to advertise that to big music fans. It'll be interesting to see how vinyl continues to grow and continues to try and find a broader audience, even as it stays geared toward diehard fans. Now, another aspect of the Nielsen report that of course, loomed large is that R&B, hip hop, which is how they classify essentially rhythmic urban music, is the most popular genre in the United States. 31% of all consumption in the United States is rhythmic and urban music. That's actually up a couple percent from last year, and I believe that its lead over the second biggest genre, which is what they call rock, but is really a much broader thing than rock, its lead over rock expanded from, I believe, 4% to 8% this year. So rap continuing to dominate. The top 3 artists of the year are all rap artists: Post Malone, Drake, and Migos in that order. And the top 2 songs of the year, God's Plan and Psycho, both firmly rhythmic urban songs.
Yeah, that's no surprise after, you and I, we follow the charts all the time. So that's not a surprise to see. But it is interesting to note that, if we would have gone back 10 years ago, I mean, the top 3 artists would have all been pop artists. So it's just another way to see how the music industry, how the landscape has changed and how it continues to change over, from year to year or from decade to decade. Even 5 years ago in 2013, the top 3 artists would have been pop artists with maybe one rap or urban artist mixed into that. Um, but it's just interesting to see that music consumption and the types and the genres of music that is being consumed to this day um, have changed from 2013 or 2008, and that's just that could be a variety of factors. It could be the quality of music that certain artists are putting out, or it could be the fact that certain artists are putting out better music and they just like streaming more, or sometimes you have a lot of for example, parties that go on, and we have these Spotify playlists that are curated or geared towards certain parties or certain functions. And I think we talked about that last week, how playlists are becoming very influential in music consumption these days, and I think that may have played a role into some of the way that music is consumed these days. But I just expect this trend to keep rising in the next couple of years. Who's to say pop may or may not take back over? That's to be figured out. We don't have the expertise to figure those things out, but based on trends, I mean, it seems like rap and hip hop and R&B is going to continue to trend upward in the next couple of years.
Now, speaking of trends, a breaking news story that came out earlier this week is that Apple Music. We talked about kind of the new rivalry between Apple Music and Spotify last week, a rivalry that was not present when we first began recording this podcast. But Apple Music has now surpassed Spotify's US based subscriber count, according to the outlet Digital Music News, which is a fairly reliable outlet. They said that the source, and I'm quoting them here, a U.S.-based major distributor, shared a report detailing the subscriber tallies of several streaming music services, and that report now ranks Apple Music as first in the United States, at least among primarily on-demand services, because like SiriusXM has more, for example, but that's not an on-demand service. Both Apple Music and Spotify have more than 20 million subscribers in the United States, with Apple now a hair ahead. So, we were just talking last week about how subscribers are so important for Spotify because they're essentially the only revenue stream that Spotify has that doesn't cut out of the revenue of major labels. And now we're learning that Spotify is just not growing them as fast as Apple Music is. Apple Music's growth rate, the article explicitly mentioned that Apple Music's growth rate is higher, and this is not including free trials, so that's not tainting the data. Now, Apple Music also just beat, if you will, they beat Spotify in terms of Scorpion streams. Despite Spotify's all-out effort to promote Drake on every playlist imaginable, Apple Music, people still stream Scorpion more times on Apple Music than they did on Spotify. Spotify probably has a right to be worried by now. I mean, what's your reaction to this news? It's been a long time coming, certainly.
Yes, and that's just if you follow Apple products, that's just kind of how things work with Apple. You have Apple Music that started off as something that was very obviously small back in 2015, I believe, when it launched. And people laughed at it. They were like, "Oh, I have Spotify. I'm going to continue to use Spotify or whatever." Fast forward to now, it's like you have streaming numbers that are bigger or even equivalent to your competition. So that again, that's a reason to worry. And I think Apple does a really good job with cross promotion in terms of upselling customers when they come into a store to buy an iPhone or to buy an iPod or whatever Apple device that they choose to get. I think they do a really good job in terms of promoting that Apple Music because it's so easy. You have iTunes on your phone already, or you have the iPod app on your phone. It's just so easy to just go in and say, "Oh, there's Apple Music." Bam, I don't have to download another app to stream my music. So for Apple Music or for Apple customers, it's just easy. And Americans, we like to get things as easy and quick as possible. So that's probably one of the reasons why Apple Music has been trending upwards in terms of subscribership. I know that's not a word, but I just use it. Subscribers and streams. And that's very important to realize because I don't think Spotify kind of thought that they were going to get passed out by Apple this early in the game. I mean, it was going to happen eventually, but to my surprise, I didn't think it would happen this early either. So I think with that, with what you're saying, with Scorpion being streamed more on Apple Music versus Spotify, I think Spotify is now in kind of like, all right, what do we do next? How can we keep these customers that we have now, and how can we leverage off the fact that Apple has, more subscribers than us? How can we start to either, have co-subscribers between Apple and Spotify, or how do we offer better services? And I think that's where they need to really sit down and kind of go over, are these playlists that effective for our customers to stay? Should we implement something different? Should we, lower the price? I don't know. But at this stage of the game, I think you're right. I think they are kind of like in that, oh shoot, what are we going to do next month?
And I think one of the things that they recognize that they pretty much have to do is diversify. Apple is a company with so many different operations in so many different fields. They've got iPhones, they've got laptops. Besides streaming music, they have other businesses that are much more massive. And Spotify, it really just has itself. And so to attract people that, aren't necessarily big music fans, that aren't necessarily looking for Spotify, they have to bundle. And bundling has been a hot topic for Spotify of late. Like I said, they were doing research about a potential bundle with vinyl records, but even that kind of stays within the realm of music. They've also asked similar survey questions about bundles with Scribd, which is an audiobook service. That's totally not music, but you can see how they're trying to at least think about reaching into other markets and kind of taking people that are invested in other markets and saying, hey, you can get a great product in your market, and at the same time we'll give you our product and you can try it out, and we think you'll like it. And that's one of the best ways to, I guess, pick off consumers from other markets. We see this with Amazon Prime, for example. Amazon Prime, is really a very sophisticated bundling service. You buy Amazon Prime and you get a ton of perks at a ton of different places, and it benefits Amazon, but it also benefits those places that are trying to get, recognition, that are trying to benefit. Whole Foods. right? You buy an Amazon Prime membership, you get a bunch of deals at Whole Foods. That's great for Whole Foods because it means more people are going to shop there. So bundling for Spotify is something that they need to figure out, and they realize that they need to do it successfully to be able to I guess attract more people to their platform because they need subscriptions. They need to be growing quickly, and bundles are also. And they also, the thing is, here's the tough part. They also need to make sure that they have margins on the bundles. They can't be losing money on this stuff. They need to become profitable, as we talked about last week, because they're a public company. So again, Spotify is in a precarious situation. That being said, they clearly do have leverage. They were able to, for example, negotiate the royalty rates that they pay labels. They were able to negotiate those down last year from all three major labels by a couple percent. That's no small feat considering how the major record labels are an oligopoly, and it's no small feat to be able to successfully negotiate with them. So Spotify they do have leverage. They just need to use it in the right way.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And it can be a daunting task, based on the fact that they have to please their customers and their subscribers. But then, as we talked about last week, they just recently went public, so they also have to please their shareholders and these people who have you know stake in their company. So they're pleasing a lot of people, and they have to make a lot of people happy without you know being too either I guess too lenient or too aggressive with their new rollout plans, whatever they decide to do in terms of bundling services or even adding services or whatever. So they have a very fine line to walk, if you will, and that's just one of the joys of going public. Like, yeah, you have capital coming in for the company, but then you also have to be like, oh shoot, we have to make sure our shareholders are happy and we can't piss them off, because if you do, they lose money, and then that's just a bigger downward spiral for Spotify. So just hope everything works out for their favor.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly something that we'll be talking about almost every week, probably, because there's new news relating to the topic almost every week, whether it's about Apple Music, whether it's about Spotify. These are active companies. They're working hard. They've got a lot of really, really dedicated employees that are trying to come up with solutions to the problems that they face, and at the same time benefit the music industry as a whole. So we'll be talking about this more and more probably as the weeks pass by. But now I want to pivot to something completely different, completely different, and that is K-pop. Now K-pop is an enigma. It is essentially music performed in Korean by Korean artists. That's the definition essentially of K-pop, even though it's called K-pop. It's not necessarily all pure pop music. And K-pop has kind of experienced a weird rise in the United States of late. Um, BTS is the most popular K-pop group there is, at least to my knowledge, and they recently had their album debut at number one, which is of course no small feat for an album entirely in Korean. Basically, they had a single that debuted at number 10, despite it being predicted to debut, I believe, in the 20s, and they've really generated a lot of online buzz. Billboard has given K-pop a ton of coverage of late. They clearly are taking this seriously, but the nature of K-pop consumption is somewhat strange and unusual. The majority of K-pop consumption, it seems, is by these really hyperactive fan bases that are 10 times more active than any of the fan bases of the traditional pop girls that have their cute little streaming parties. K-pop fan bases are serious. And it's true that K-pop culture in general seems to me at least to kind of revolve around such bases, which explains why they're so active, but it also causes every K-pop chart entry there is to be extremely front-loaded. So BTS's song Fake Love, even though it debuted at number 10, which was an exceptionally strong debut, nobody expected it was going to debut that high, it went 10 to 51 in its second week, and it's now in the 70s. It's like we talked about earlier, going top 10 doesn't necessarily mean you've got a hit, and you could argue that this song really isn't a proper hit. It's only being consumed by a base. So, a couple questions here. Is K-pop something that can crack the general public and become something that's more than a niche thing? Can it can there be more than one successful K-pop group in the United States at one time? How many can there be? And of course, K-pop is really strong on YouTube because they have a strong emphasis on the music video in K-pop, And of course, the rule change hurts such songs now because if you remember the Billboard rule changes, they're downweighting free streams, which are streams from YouTube are included in that, and they're upweighting paid streams from the paid tier of Spotify and from Apple Music and Tidal, etc. So, what is the future for K-pop in the United States?
Honestly, I think it's still going to be hard to crack this market. I mean, as you said, there are there are strong fan bases in the U.S. that support the K-pop groups, which is amazing because it just shows that these groups have a very loyal following, and their tours do amazing. There was a tour last year. I think BTS did here in New Jersey, and I believe the Prudential Center. They said it was sold out, which is one of my coworkers told me. I was like, wow, that's amazing. I mean, the fact that they can pull up that many fans and for them to still be loyal to this day is amazing. But on a larger scale, where they're getting the support not only from their fans but from also casual listeners, I think that's still going to be a bit harder because and I hate to speak downly on Americans, but they only really like things that they can understand, and the average American may not understand a song that's entirely in a foreign language, so they're not gonna support it. For example, Gangnam Style years ago, it was a huge hit on YouTube, and it was surprisingly a huge sales hit as well. But radio took it as far as it could. I think it peaked at like 13 or 12 on pop radio, which for a foreign language song, that's pretty big. That's pretty good. But ever since then, you haven't had that type of those type of hits. It just come and go like that. And I think the main reason is because a lot of people are probably resistant to the fact, oh, it's all in a foreign language. They're not going to listen to it. Therefore, they're not going to probably sit through the 3 or 4 minutes to stream it, or spend the $1.29 on iTunes to buy the song. So I think there's still a ways to go in terms of K-pop groups that are going to completely just break through into the U.S. I mean, they've already got the fan base. That's not the problem. But to sustain that type of success, it's going to take some work. I mean, like you said, the single "Fake Love" debuted at number 10, but then it tumbled the next week, and then that's just really a sign that it was fueled by fans, And when you have a single that drops that hard, that means people outside of the fan base are not really paying attention to the song. So I think it's gonna take some time for that to actually happen. 5 years, I don't know, 10 years maybe, but it's definitely gonna take some time, in my opinion.
And I guess people who are fans of K-pop can take some encouragement from the recent success of Latin music. A song like Despacito, even though it was remixed in English, Mi Gente, again remixed in English, but still a lot of Spanish in those songs, and they were successful on radio as well as on sales and streaming. So you're seeing more and more of that these days. There are far more Spanish hits on the chart than there were several years ago, and that's due in part to their incredibly strong YouTube streaming numbers, which, again, YouTube has just been downweighted on the Hot 100, so you wonder how much that's going to affect Latin music and also K-pop. But K-pop fans can take some encouragement in the performance of Latin songs lately. And I agree, it's easy to kind of dismiss K-pop as a kind of cultish niche genre, but I do think that's wrong. It's becoming more mainstream, and it's only a matter of time before, I mean, there have already been a ton of think pieces in the mainstream media about it. On CNN, for example, I saw an article about K-pop when BTS's album debuted at number one. I saw an article on CNN about it, and I was like, wow, it's really penetrated the mainstream in a way that it hasn't before. Gangnam Style did, but that was an exception because it really was an insanely viral video, a video that we haven't seen the likes of again to this day. Like, we haven't seen, so obviously the coverage was justified for that, but now we're seeing think pieces about K-pop in general. And I guess it's important to note I referred to K-pop as a genre, which it's really not. It's really mishmash of many genres, and the common denominator is that they're sung in Korean, basically.
And again, with that, it's just gonna really take some, I guess, some type of research, if you will, around like different focus groups in the U.S. and seeing, what the public really wants. And again, a lot of people downplay radio all the time, but it's still one of the most used forms of consumption for new music. So I think radio is still going to have to be an important part in trying to break through for these K-pop artists to get play on radio and to get that exposure, because hundreds and millions of people listen to the radio on a daily basis. So I mean, that's more than YouTube videos or what have you. That's the radio is still going to be around. It's still going to be an important piece for labels to try to, work their magic with. And I hate using the P word because we use it all the time, but you know, some labels may want to think about pushing their artists as much as they can on radio to see how far they'll get in terms of like high placements or on pop charts or even adult pop or even rhythmic. But I think radio is going to have to be an important piece for K-pop artists as well. It's not going to have to just be put out a YouTube video and see how that carries over. I mean, because the fans obviously are going to stream it to death, but without radio, and if you're a brand new artist, you're not really going to take off properly.
Yeah, and you make a good point that it's really not useful for anybody to just assume that the public will reject K-pop. It's worth testing it at least and doing some market research and doing some local radio testing. There's no harm in that. If you're just doing local testing, it's not going to break your bank. And for a label, the results could be invaluable. It could turn out that there are some isolated demographics in the US that really like K-pop, that turn out that they really like it, even though they've never heard of it before. It it still has a lot of I guess potential exposure. It still has a large audience to introduce itself to. And if it can introduce itself in the right way, it certainly has great potential for success. But whether that whether that's possible is a whole other question, and we might cover it some other time. But we're going to talk about now something very different. We're going to talk about just a general topic. What were the most we're around the mid-year mark, of course, with the Nielsen report coming out. We're around 9 days into the second half of the year. What have been the most underwhelming album eras this year for you in terms of success? What artists, what albums do you think really should have seen a lot more success than they did and really left a lot of potential on the table?
Oh, that's a very good question and kind of open ended, because I think there are plenty that are that were underwhelming. Um, I mean, I'll just take it back a little bit because this era actually started in 2017, but she actually had a single that she released in 2018. Dua Lipa, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. She had a pretty good track with New Rules, which is actually the longest charting song on pop radio in history. I think 44 weeks and counting. Um, so she definitely made a name for herself on radio. Um, but I feel like as we got the next single, which was IDGAF, which stands for exactly what the acronym is, I don't give a F. It kind of fell through the cracks, and I thought that the era would be better or even a bigger hit, not a bigger hit than New Rules, but maybe as big or maybe smaller. Um, but I think with that, her label kind of pushed her a little bit too late, after New Rules had peaked, and it's kind of like, when you're a brand new artist, you have to be out there, you have to, promote, and I don't think she did enough of that here in the U.S. As I thought she would. Pretty sure the album was a success overseas in the UK and like some other European countries, but over here was kind of like meh. And again, she's a new artist, so for what she did was pretty good. I'm not saying that the album or the era was a complete bomb. It was just um, uh, kind of upsetting or kind of underwhelming to see that the second single wasn't able to gain as much traction as as New Rules did. And another error that I thought would be at least decent. Um, I think honestly, I think Queen, Nicki Minaj's new era is kind of shaky. Like I think she's kind of going a little bit all over the place with the singles, and I don't know if it has anything to do with the fact that you know it's the thing is you have to be careful uh, with with certain ways you release your music, and you have to really understand your market and the current landscape. So, now that you have Cardi B in the mix of female rappers, you kind of have to test out your market and see, if you can, you know, release your music and be fine, or if you have to go back to the drawing board, do other things. But I think with Queen coming out in less than a month, or like almost a month from now, I don't think this era has started off on good terms. I mean, yes, she did get a top 10 hit, Chun Li, after the video premiere, but the other singles have not done as well. I know Barbie Teens was not an official single; it was kind of like as we call it, buzz single. Um, but then Bed, the new single that's now out, video was released on Friday. Hasn't really taken off yet, but again, it's kind of one of those things when you are a superstar status like Nicki Minaj and Ariana Grande, if a song is going to be a smash hit, we would have seen the signs kind of already. And, you know, the numbers are okay, decent, but they're not great. And I think with that, I think Queen is kind of an underwhelming era right now. Again, things could turn around, but the way that things have been painted out in the last couple months with the rollout, it is a bit underwhelming.
Yeah, and I think you make a couple good points there, and I want to talk about Nicki for a little bit because I know it's tempting to conclude that Cardi replaced Nicki, and everybody who was listening to Nicki is now listening to Cardi B and not listening to Nicki at all, which I think is a wrong conclusion. But I think that Nicki has just not been very interesting lately, and she's also really dug herself in a PR hole. There was a someone posted a screenshot on Twitter of her absolutely berating a fan in their Twitter DMs, like unsolicited, and she just sent this DM to this supposed fan and just excoriated her for a bunch of things. I can't remember exactly what they were, but it went viral, and so she's not helping her own cause here. I think most of the attention this era is not going to be on the music; it's going to be on her, and because of the fact that she's not especially a favorable, someone who induces favorable opinions these days, that's not especially a good thing. You want the music to speak for itself. You want to have a big hit that gets people back into you, that makes them, that makes them disregard whatever you've done wrong, on Twitter, whoever you have beef with, whoever you're messing with. But I think that for Nicki, this era is all about her right now and not about her music. We'll see what happens when the album comes out, but I'm skeptical, and I don't think that she's going to have a lot of longevity. I think her activity is going to be mostly bass driven. Um, Now, my pick for an underwhelming era is Ray Shremmerd. Now, they broke out in a big way a couple years ago. They had a lot of hits from their first album, Strem Life, Throw Some Mo, No Type, for example, both big hits. No Flex Zone was a big hit. This time around, they released a triple album, 9 songs on each album, one for Slim Jimmy, one for Sway Lee, and one that kind of combined both of them. And they released several singles in advance of it, and just none of them stuck at all. Perplexing Pegasus, or Close featuring Travis Scott, or Teed Up, or Guatemala, none of them seemed to stick, and they debuted with only like 50, 60,000 units, I believe, and just tanked because they don't have any hits supporting them. And that's just, for me, a shocking decline from where they were a few years ago, because they really were the exciting young stars of hip hop. They were new, they were fresh, they were just really really fun to listen to and fun to follow. But their star seems to have dimmed a little bit now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, after Black Beatles took off, um, obviously they were big at the moment, but then they kind of, faded back into their little, into their little, I guess, comfort space. And they kind of took a little bit of time off, but it's like, all right, wait a minute. Again, you are, not that new to the public, but after having Black Beatles, you would have thought that they would have rushed the process of, getting an album out and, staying relevant, if you will. Because to be honest with you, I knew that they were releasing something, and when you had mentioned it, I didn't think that the album was already out. Like, I'm not being shady or anything, but I did not realize that they even had an album out until now. So that is very underwhelming. I agree 100%. Coming off of a huge hit like that, even if it was viral, it did stick around for some time. And they've had, hits previous to that. No Flex Zone was a huge hit. Again, like you said, Throw Some More was a huge hit. And even No Type was a huge hit as well. So, not huge, but it was a huge urban rhythmic hit. So, they've had exposure in the past, and that is very underwhelming to see. But in terms of that, it's like, I don't think they're completely dead in the water, but they may have to reevaluate some things because I know they've been with Mike Will Made It since day one. So maybe that may be worth interesting to see if they're going to switch up producers or uh, mixing teams or whatnot, because maybe some of their fans are tired of the Michael Mader productions. I don't know, but that maybe is something interesting to watch to see if they're going to actually switch up anything in the future. Um, but that's just kind of like very underwhelming. Now that you brought that out, that I think that is probably one of the most underwhelming eras of this year.
And I also want to talk about Charlie Puth, who released his album finally after a very long wait. He delayed it a long time. I can't remember. I can't recall exactly how long he delayed it for, but it was a long time. He released his album, and the first new single off that album was "Done for Me" featuring Kalani. Just by his standards, absolutely bombed on pop radio. It briefly went top 20, and now it's just free falling down. It's at number 36 with Recurrence right now, and its bullet is negative 1,000. So while that album technically has two big radio hits, Attention and How Long, they were hits well before the album actually came out. So if we're talking about the era starting from the release of the album, he's got no momentum all of a sudden. Attention was, one of the bigger hits of his career. How Long did decently on radio as well. It was in the 20s for a while on the Hot 100, but his momentum seems to have completely dissipated.
It faded quickly and swiftly. And that's just an example of the fact when you're a new artist, you have to be out there. You have to keep the momentum. You have to be constantly promoting and, releasing your album when the iron is hot, if you will. And if you're not, you're going to fade to the background. There are plenty of other artists who are out there, you know, willing to be seen, ready to be noticed. And again, it's very underwhelming considering that he had "See You Again," which again was a huge hit. He had "We Don't Talk Anymore," even like Marvin Gaye, which was only like a top 25 hit, but it was still pretty big with the longevity it had. And then "One Call Away," which was the follow up to "See You Again." But it's just underwhelming. It's very underwhelming to see that he just kind of fizzled in such a short amount of time. And it's again goes back to the fact that you had these huge radio hits, but then you have to capitalize on that. And when you're not capitalizing, the opportunity kind of just leaves, if you will. It goes away. And his album, I don't know how much it has been consumed to date. I don't know if it's even close to being gold. It may be because of Attention and How Long, but in terms of long term success and longevity, I mean, obviously with the song falling hard on pop radio like that, as you mentioned, I don't think the album is going to have that much of longevity, and that's associated with it. So again, he has something to fall back on. I think. I mean, he's a songwriter, so he has that going for him. Again, it's not the end of the road for him. I'm not saying he's completely dead in the water, but to go from having these hits and now all of a sudden you can't chart high with one of your songs when you're used to being that high on the charts. It's kind of alarming and underwhelming.
Yeah, and he debuted with 58,000 units. I just looked it up. I didn't actually have that etched into my memory. So it's definitely not. It's probably not even at 150, 200,000 units since release, or maybe just past there. The good thing for Charlie Puth is that he has a track record of radio support. So programming directors and the people that are controlling radio playlists are likely to at least give serious consideration to whatever he releases next. But the downside of being such a radio focused artist, and we've kind of alluded to this, is that he really doesn't have a fan base, a strong fan base. His fan base is in essence radio listeners who like whatever song that they're hearing from him that's currently on the radio. It's going to be difficult for him to kind of rebound this era without leaning on radio. And so he can't there's nothing that he can do personally. It's at the whims of radio. And that's kind of a defeating feeling for an artist, I would think. And for his management team, of course. They have to work really hard at radio, and they know that if they can't get anything going there, the era is just not going to get off the ground. And that's the consequence of being a more one-dimensional artist. I mean, the thing is, there are only two dimensions really these days. You've got radio and streaming. I mean, you could make an argument that video streaming and on-demand streaming are different beasts, but now that video streaming has been downweighted, I don't know if you can consider that a whole separate dimension. But it's going to be tough for Charlie Puth to rebound without radio.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of his bread and butter. And once that gets taken away, it's going to be hard for him to have that exposure because, I mean, I'm not really familiar with his streaming numbers, but I don't think he's that much of a strong streamer for him to have support outside of radio. So, that's really going to be difficult for him to get back on trend because once radio decides that they're done with you, then they're kind of done with you, and it's going to be hard to rebuild that reputation, if you will, to get back in good graces with program directors and whatnot. But his music hasn't been offensive to the point where people hate him or he's done something bad to the public. So he doesn't have any like negative backlash against him. It's just that he has to get back on track and find something that works for him, or even maybe take some more time off and kind of come back with something stronger, or something that's maybe I guess in trend, on trend to kind of get a hit and get back on radio.
And another artist that I think he's significantly less underwhelming than the last two that we talked about, but I think his era still merits discussion because I think he's in an interesting place. G-Eazy. Now, G-Eazy's album, which was The Beautiful and Damned, had a pretty nice debut. It debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200, and it was bolstered by No Limit, which was the single featuring ASAP Rocky and Cardi B that was a top 5 hit on the Hot 100. He followed that up with Him and I featuring Halsey, but the problem with Him and I is that it really did not have any sort of longevity on streaming. It immediately entered into a steady decrease after its debut, and even though it reached number 1 on pop radio, it couldn't crack the top 10 on the Hot 100, and it really did not end up feeling like a big hit. It really felt like a very moderate, subdued hit compared to what expectations were at its release, and we haven't got a follow up yet, at least not that I know of, from G-Eazy, and his album's currently sitting at number 106 on the Billboard 200, which I don't think is where he wanted it to be sitting just around a half of a year after its release. So, I mean, is there a way that he turns this era around? I mean, I haven't personally listened to the album, so I don't really know whether he has a lot of potential singles, radio material on the album. But I mean, he really seemed like he had an opportunity to elevate his persona uh, off of a song like No Limit, and he just appeared to fail to capitalize here.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I haven't really listened to the album either outside of the two singles, so I can't really speak on if there are any comeback, if there is any comeback material on that album, but underwhelming to say the least because of the fact that he had exposure last year or a few years previous with Me, Myself, and I, and he was on Britney's song with Make Me, and then he had his own hits, No Limit, and again, as you mentioned, Him and I, which was okay in terms of success. And that I know for a fact that song was pushed a lot on streaming services because it appeared in almost every playlist that you can think of. So that song was meant to be a hit by the label, but it just did not take off the way that they wanted to. So I think the label just kind of tore back for a second and said, all right, we're not going to really, they're probably thinking we're not going to put any effort into any next major efforts or singles from this album because we don't know if our if our efforts are gonna work. So with that being said, I'm not sure if this era is gonna turn around because it's been almost 6 months or 5 months since Him and I has peaked and gone away. So if there was another single coming from that album, it would have come by now, And with rap and hip hop being some of the best streaming genres out there today, and for his album to be in the hundreds on Billboard, this time down the road, I don't think that really spells for any type of like future like hit potential or whatever, because that's just showing you the album is not really in demand right now. I mean, comparing that to, Post Malone, whose album stuck around in the top 40 for a very long time, even after Congratulations started to subdue off or start to, peak off. People were still streaming the album tracks, at a good rate. But with G-Eazy's album that's currently out, I mean, it kind of shows that there's really no public interest at the moment. So yeah, I don't know. I don't even think that this era is going to continue on. I think this era is probably it's probably done. And he's probably working on his next album as we speak.
And I really like that you make the Post Malone comparison because both are white males that are in the rhythmic urban space, and yet Post is so much more successful than G-Eazy. Of course, for many reasons that have nothing to do with G-Eazy, but I think Post has a very defined persona. They've marketed him brilliantly from his looks. His hair is very distinctive, for example. Even simple things like that. He's got a very unique live tone. His rasp in his live performances is unmistakable. It's him. And indeed, one of those live performances went viral, like we mentioned, I Fall Apart. But G-Eazy, to me, he's such a milquetoast personality. There's nothing appealing about him, specifically about him. I'm not talking about his music in general, but him as a person. He's not selling himself well to the public, in my opinion. And there's nothing there that makes me want to say, I really want to listen to this guy's music, just to, because I'm curious, because I'm excited, because he's interesting, because he's mysterious. I don't get any vibes from him. You know what I mean? Like, there's just nothing there.
Yeah, and I agree with that, honestly. Now that you point that out, it's like, I don't think G-Eazy is really anything beyond his music. So I think people know his music, but they don't know him. And when you don't really have a personality to connect with the public, for them to say that you're interesting enough to make them listen to more of your songs, then it's going to be hard to really sell yourself outside of that. So it's kind of like, Post Malone, everybody knows him and he knows music as well. So it's easier for him to connect with the public. And he's done multiple tours. He's had, tens of thousands of people to come out to see him. Whereas G-Eazy, I mean, I'm not really a fan of his, so I don't really follow his, what he does on a day-to-day basis. But I do know that he's not, as you said, he's not exposing himself to the public. Whether it's in a good way, bad way, whatever, people don't really know who he is. And then, if you listen to the radio casually, like me, a few years ago, when I first heard a song of his, when I first heard Me, Myself, and I honestly thought it was Drake because he kind of sounds like early Drake to me. So I was like, oh, this is a Drake song? And then I did the Shazam. I was like, oh, somebody named G Easy. I was like, okay, I mean, song is good, I like it, but you know, when people start to compare you to other artists, you know, again, they're not going to know you outside of that one radio song that you had, or that those couple, you know, hits that you had. You kind of have to be out there and expose yourself to make people know who you are, and you know, I guess the type of music that you put out.
All right, we have to wrap up now, but that's an excellent point, and I think we can expound on that in a later podcast. You know, what does it really take for an artist to differentiate themselves from everybody else out there? What kind of marketing campaigns do you have to do? What kind of songs do you have to put out? What kind of videos do you have to make? What kind of social media activity do you have to do? You know, can posts on Instagram, Twitter posts, what helps you the most in creating a persona? And that's exactly what artist managers work on a lot. And I guess we can examine in a future podcast. I mean, what methods we think might be the most successful. And I'd be interested to hear what you, the listeners, think as well. Remember, you can always post questions for us in the thread for the podcast, which is up live in the charts section, and that's where you'll find the link to this podcast, of course. Um, Ask us any and all questions relating to charts, the music industry in general. Um, all all topics are on the table. There's nothing that we won't answer relating to the music industry. But for now, we have to wrap up. We'll see you for episode 14, hopefully very soon.
All right, thanks for joining.